Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a new podcast about how experience shapes everything from products to services to entire businesses. I'm your host, Bryan McClain, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. We've spent the last 15 years working as innovation researchers in Silicon Valley, studying human behavior and partnering with everyone from unfunded startups to the biggest names in the industry, helping create experiences that people love. This is going to be a lot of fun. Demetrius and I have been wanting to do this for years. We've been tossing ideas around, and once the pandemic hit, we had to shelter in place. We decided to finally make this happen. We're going to talk about tech. We're going to talk about different industries such as media and entertainment. But most importantly, we're going to talk about it from the perspective of the consumer, the person who experiences these products every day and who actually determines whether a product or service will survive in this market. Since this is our first episode, we wanted to share a little about our background and why we do what we do. So Demetrius, and I call him D, we've spent our entire professional career studying human behavior, trying to figure out how to build products that truly serve the needs of the consumer and inspire people every day. We've done this with companies like Amazon and Google, Samsung, Microsoft, as well as startups and some venture firms. We decided to start this series to give everyone a glimpse into how we think about human behavior, how we study human behavior so that we can gather all the data that people use, and how companies use that data to make big decisions. Finally, we want to give predictions about the future, kind of looking ahead. What are we thinking? How do we think it's going to unfold? We're going to drop episodes every Tuesday during each season, so check back at this time next week to hear what we're talking about. Today, we're going to talk about streaming media because it's huge right now. And with everyone sheltering in place and stuck at home, this is a great topic to get started on. We're going to talk about where it's at, how it all got started, and where we see it going. So let's get started. So, hey, D, how's it going? Are you excited? It's our first episode.
Yeah, it should be great. I think this is the perfect time to talk about streaming. There's so much stuff going on that it's really just taking off. Especially right now when everybody's at home, they're sheltering in place, they're watching tons of content. This is the hot topic.
Are you watching a ton of content every day too? Because I know my numbers are up a lot.
Relative to outside of the pandemic, yeah, for sure. I felt like it spiked a bit and then kind of got tired of it and started turning to other stuff. But like, it's definitely still consuming a lot of content.
It's funny because I was actually talking to a friend of ours the other day that you and I have. I'll leave his name out, but he was mentioning that he's kind of getting burned out a little bit. Like he said, I've watched so much stuff now that he said, I feel like I need to take a break and take a pause from watching.
Yeah, it's a cycle, and you start to get it out of your system, and you want to do something else. That totally makes sense. And then over time, you kind of cycle back again.
Yeah, totally. Also, too, I read all those articles that you had sent to me about Quibi. Super interesting how they had that quick adoption of people kind of testing out the service, and then I guess it's dropped off quite a bit. It's not surprising actually, because when you and I originally heard about the service, we both agreed like great operators, Meg Whitman, Jeffrey Katzenberg. But the fact is, they're charging for short form, and we've done a lot of research in this area, over the last 15 years, and man, it is hard to shift human behavior. I mean, people are not used to paying for short form content. I mean, do you feel the same way?
We've looked at this a few times in our work, and we've never found that people were willing to make the shift. And this is not a small precedent, right? People have been getting short content, either free or ad supported, since the very beginning of film. Like the first film shown over 100 years ago were little shorts that people would watch as technology demonstrators of these are moving pictures, come check them out, like a circus sideshow. And then you saw them kind of as the shorts played before a feature film would start if you go to a movie. And then it turned into TV shorts like Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse, and then music videos in the 80s and 90s. Then it moved online, and you had YouTube, and now you have Vine and TikTok. And I think that's what they failed to realize, is that they treated it as though they're stepping into this empty space where there was no competition because Netflix wasn't focused on short form. But if you look at the use case, that space isn't empty. There's TikTok. TikTok is doing great. There's Snapchat. There's YouTube. There's Instagram Live. There's tons of stuff that people are currently watching in order to kind of fill that space.
One of the articles you sent, he actually mentioned in there that he's filling the white space, the time when people are like, standing in line, waiting for, I don't know, to get their food at a restaurant or things like that. But I don't understand how that's any different than me bringing up YouTube and watching a quick clip, or just taking something that I've been watching regularly, like I'm watching a documentary right now, and just pausing it and watching an extra 10 minutes of it while I'm standing in line. You know what I mean?
I think that he looked at it as though there was less competition, and I look at it and I think there's more because you're not just competing against, uh, Netflix's and those other kind of scripted content. You're competing for anything that people are using to fill that time. So it's not just scripted content; it's crowdsourced content, it's Twitter, it's social media, it's reading your Kindle book, it's flipping, it's taking a photo, it's all the things that people do right now when they're currently just hanging out and waiting. They have a few minutes to kill. Not to mention podcasts, which are just exploding.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I question is like, do you think that they did any research early on? Because I know the companies that we've worked with in the past that were exploring this area and this space, they had us in the homes of consumers and really observing their behavior and talking to them about what they're willing to pay for, and really studying the demographics and the psychographics and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that they tapped in, or they believe that they tapped into something that maybe that we weren't aware of?
They might have. I kind of doubt it. We know from being in the Valley for so long that startups don't do a lot of research in this area. They might do some market research, but compared to kind of the FANG companies like Amazon or Salesforce or uh, Netflix, they're not getting in usually. Startups aren't usually getting in and really validating their value proposition from the very beginning. So I would be surprised if they did, especially with Meg Whitman being kind of old school and Katzenberg being from the Hollywood model. They might have just done some surveys and maybe some focus groups, but not a lot of in-depth stuff.
Got it. YouTube tried this, right? I mean, this is the thing. Like, I love YouTube. I have all these people I follow, like Jamie O'Brien and all kinds of different, YouTubers and stuff like that, where I watch their, 10 and 20-minute clips all the time. I don't pay for it, obviously. But they did try to step into this a little bit. And I think you were mentioning something yesterday about Karate Kid, because I watched that whole series, by the way, that Karate
Yeah.
Kid series. I loved it. But you mentioned that they might be getting out of that.
So Netflix or YouTube has been trying to do this kind of YouTube Red, YouTube Premium thing for a while, where they took. I mean, their primary model is to take their most successful channels, like I don't know, like PewDiePie or Jenna Marbles, and to build some kind of like a reality TV show around it. And among that, while they were trying to sell that service, they tried to build up their scripted TV offerings. So that was Karate Kid and a few other shows, or Cobra Kai, excuse me. And it was a huge hit. But I think one of the things they realized is that it's very expensive. And unlike a normal tech release, where one release can get users and draw attention for years, a media release usually is kind of in the public eye for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, and then it's on to the next thing. So after you watch your couple hours of Cobra Kai content, you have
Mhm.
to have something there ready and waiting for them. And I think they looked at the investment that was involved in creating an entire content library, and they just decided to go a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like what they're doing is working. Like, stick with it, right? Like, YouTube is exploding, and it continues to every year, right? And it's a great platform. Yeah, they have their troubles like everybody, but overall, it's a really successful service. And then you look at other services like the Hulus and things like that. I feel like it would be very simple for them to weave in short form content if they really wanted to. And that kind of made me think that maybe Quibi should, I hate to say cut out the tech side, but like stop with the development of a streaming service and actually focus their effort on just producing content, right? Because they have this great operator, Meg Whitman, who's run amazing companies in the past. And then you have Katzenberg, who can focus on content development and finding talent and building amazing content. And then they can serve it basically to all of these different platforms that exist. So they're basically building a studio. Maybe that's not what they wanted to do, but I see that as a potential successful path forward, if they pivoted and kind of went in that direction instead.
Yeah, trying to do both at the same time, I think it splits your focus, and they're both tremendously difficult things to accomplish. And trying to do them at the same time, it's just so hard. And we see people try to do this, and I think we're going to see a few of them start to exit over time. So
Yeah.
some of the studios that have tried it to develop streaming services, I think they're probably going to go back to the studio model over time. And some of we already saw with YouTube where they tried to become a studio and decided that it wasn't for them. So
Yeah.
I think it is probably in their best bet. Their best chance at survival and long-term success is probably to focus on content creation, maybe even to make their early stuff non-exclusive and just put them out on other services so they can bring some revenue and awareness in. From there, provide some kind of extra service to it or extra value with by going directly to Quibi. But the other thing is, I think that the singular focus on 7 to 10 minute clips, I don't know that necessarily makes sense. I think if they had if it was positioned alongside other longer form content, I think
Hmm.
that would make more sense. Like if they were able to buy some kind of a successful franchise and host some of its longer form content, and then have like short form add-ons or supplements to it, I think that makes more sense. One of the things I've noticed from what Netflix and HBO and some of these other content creators are doing is they're doing less of the shoehorning into like this needs to be exactly 22 minutes in order to fit our ads into it and for it to fit into a 30-minute time slot. And it's more, this episode is 34 minutes, and the next episode is going to be 45 minutes, and the next episode is going to be an hour and five. The content is as long as the storytelling requires it to be, and to chop it up and to make it and to shoehorn it into a 7 or 10 minute kind of window, it just seems very passe at this point.
It's actually going the opposite direction of what podcasts are doing, right? So if you
Right.
look at Mark Maron, Joe Rogan, Whitney Cummings, like any of these kind of successful podcasters, they have no time limit and people love it. Some of them are 3.5 hours long. Some are 32 minutes and 44 seconds, right? They don't care. And they're doing exactly what you said, which is we build a story out, or an interview, and it goes as long as it needs to go. And when we feel like it's done, it's done. And people love that. So this is going to be really interesting to see how it all shakes out. One of the things I keep thinking about is that most people, and probably the people who will be listening to this podcast, are not familiar with how, one, this stuff got started, and two, how it kind of like formed over the years. So I wanted to take a step back for a moment, just a brief moment, and I was hoping, because you led a lot of research projects like 15 years ago on streaming, if you could just give us a summary of what it looked like when this stuff was just getting started, when we just started to peek around the corner and see that something was about to happen in this space. And then we'll fast forward to where we are now, kind of see if it turned out the way we thought it was going to turn out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started off before streaming was really a technical possibility. I remember in the very early days, YouTube itself was just, they're putting out 2, 3 minute video clips. It was much more like what we see from TikTok now, of just amateurs putting out short clips that they thought were funny. And even back then it was technically like, how are they doing this? How do they have all the bandwidth and the storage that's involved in both uploading and downloading content like this? And at the time, we would go into people's homes and we would look at how they were watching TV or movies or any other kind of content. And we saw them doing something that we thought was kind of predictive of where things were going. So these home theater PC users were kind of a fringe movement where people were taking their old machines, an old desktop tower or a laptop or a Mac Mini or something, and they were setting it up as basically kind of a connected or a wired file server where they would download content to that computer and then plug it into their TV through an HDMI cable or something similar, and they would just hit play on their computer and play it on their TV. And we went in and we started trying to understand kind of what they were doing, how much work was involved, why they were doing it, their motivations. And what we found was that people just, very simply, they wanted to watch what they wanted to watch when they wanted to watch it. They didn't want it to be dictated for them by some, cable programmer. They wanted to be able to have control of their viewing experience.
Yeah, but what specifically, because I remember coming out of some of those sessions, right? We were like in people's houses in the middle of nowhere and we're like watching them make, set up these systems and all that. But like, what specifically did you see that made you say to me that day? I remember when we finished our last session on one of those research projects a long time ago, you said, oh, this is totally going to blow up. Like the next 5 to 10 years, like so much stuff is going to move into streaming. Like, what is it specifically that you saw that really made you realize that this was going to unfold the way it did? Because you were spot on.
Yeah, I think that there were a couple things. Well, one of the underlying factors is just recognizing that this was the direction that the infrastructure was heading. We knew that bandwidth was going to increase and that storage was going to get cheaper. So we knew that those technical limitations were eventually going to go away. But from a behavioral standpoint, we saw the how much of a experience advantage streaming provided versus kind of the old models of driving to Blockbuster, looking for a DVD, having to go to another one because that one is already all rented out, taking it home and not liking it and just kind of being stuck with it, or having to be on time to watch a TV show when it aired the first time, or trying to catch a rerun. We saw kind of how the experience was an advantage and how clearly people were able to talk about how it was so much better. Like, definitely see a huge difference when people are kind of unclear of the advantage versus when they're absolute advocates for something that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And
At the same time, though, it was really easy to do. Like, let's not discount the fact that they literally took a cable, plugged it into their laptop, plugged it into the television, grabbed a file, pressed play, and suddenly they were quote unquote streaming, right? Like, it was simple. It's like, any major company that was producing hardware at the time could have saw that data and said, oh, I can build a little box to put on your television so that you can grab content directly from any of the websites that have content on them that you want to have seen on your television, right?
yeah, I mean, it was easy to get started, and there was also a lot of work that people could put in order to advance it. So we saw people having this very easy point of entry, at least easy relative to other forms of media. It's obviously a little bit more difficult than what we expect now from a streaming service. But we saw people, getting into it and liking it and paying for new hardware in order to have a better experience. Buying a new TV just so they can have an HDMI cable so that they can get better playback. We saw
That's
people
true. They were
spending money.
investing into it.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
were researching software systems like Boxy way back then, and you see the amount of work that they're willing to put into it, even though it's easy to get started. And you just saw that there's no way around the fact that somebody putting work into it, putting their time and effort into it, is just absolutely a unquestionable measure of value.
Yeah. No, that's a really good way to put it. So like if you fast forward though to now, right? And we knew what they were asking for back then. Do you feel like they got what they wanted?
Well, to an extent, right? So nowadays we have a lot of asynchronous viewing, a lot of saved content. So you can start like The Irishman, for example, and watch 2 hours of it, and then hit stop and come back and finish it later, which you couldn't do under the old cable model. But at the same time, you have a lot of fragmentation. So where before people just wanted to, I mean, the holy grail is you pay for one service, you get access to all the content that's out there, as opposed to paying for 5 or 6 different services in order to get access to little pieces of the content that you want. And I think that fragmentation, which is a result of kind of business and legal realities rather than technical realities, is
Hmm.
is kind of creating a fragmented, imperfect experience where now people are turning to aggregators or websites, or search engines in order to determine, like, hey, I want to watch Shawshank Redemption. Where do I need to go in order to watch that? Is that on Netflix? Is that on Amazon Prime? Where is that? And it's whenever you have some of these middleware companies popping up or aggregators popping up, it's indicating an imperfection in the experience.
That's true. And actually, I wonder if this is something that Disney actually picked up on a long time ago before they even started development of Disney Plus, because they acquired a lot of different studios, right? Or
Mhm.
content, I guess to say. So, picking up LucasArts and Fox and Marvel and all these and kind of putting them all underneath their brand. Then suddenly they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, we're developing a streaming service. And the minute that streaming service launches, you can watch all of this content for one simple price or one little price, right? And I wonder if they kind of saw the way things were turning and they realized that the first thing they got to do is consolidate and try to own as much content as possible, even though they already had a lot of content. And then the second thing they need to do is deliver it to the customer in a seamless and kind of inexpensive way.
Yeah, and I think that Disney had an advantage partially because some of these companies were willing to sell to Disney when they might not have been willing to sell to others because of Disney's reputation with content and how they were run. Like, I don't know that Pixar or Lucasfilms gets sold to another company at that time, right? If Warner Brothers comes knocking on Marvel's door, obviously, I don't think they sell to them. I think that they look at Disney and how they run their business and what they own and feel like their content, their baby, is just safer in those hands.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, now that you're looking at what's going on in the market, do you see any future consolidation happening?
I think we're kind of on the tail end of it. I think that the success that Disney's had buying the studios that they have is really starting to drive the price up. And also, they have already kind of consolidated a lot of the major franchises that are out there. So I don't think that Time Warner is going to be an acquisition target because
Hmm.
they are just too big. They're already they're more of a company that acquires than is acquired. There are a few studios I think that are still kind of out there, like Paramount. I think they would make a lot of sense as an acquisition target, maybe by Apple or Amazon or even Quibi, potentially, because they have a great back catalog, even though they haven't put out too many hugely successful movies recently. But other than that, I think that what we might start to see is some of these studios who are putting out their own streaming service realize that the market can only really support three or four primary streaming services that everybody's going to be willing to pay for. And then they're going to start going back to kind of a licensing model. And they might have some stuff that's exclusively licensed so that only one company gets those for a few years. And then some of it's non exclusive, so it's on every streaming service. But
Yeah.
uh, from the user perspective, the idea of having five different services, six different services, seven different services that you're paying for, it has this psychological weight on you of like, I'm paying for this thing, but I'm barely watching it. I got it so I can watch Cobra Kai, and I haven't gone back and watched anything else. Why am I still paying for it?
Yeah, and what
And
we've noticed too is it's not even just the cost. It's not like they're like, "Oh, I pay $5 a month for it." It's this strange psychology of feeling like you're being wasteful.
yeah, it's kind of like when you pay for an app and then, maybe it's just $1, but if you don't use it, you still feel like you made a poor choice. If like I used it for a couple days and now it's just sitting there on my phone reminding me of a bad decision that I made.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think about some of the services that are popping up now, like Peacock, CBS All Access. I mean, I think that's been around for a little bit, but I'm not going to buy into all of those, right? And so it makes
Yeah.
me kind of wonder if we're going to get to a point where some of these services like Roku and Apple TV and that kind of stuff, if they're just going to basically have a flat package fee, just like cable did back in the day, and
Hmm.
just say, hey, you buy your Roku for whatever it is, $99. And then for $15 a month, here's all the different channels that you get for a flat $15. You pay Roku the $15 per month, and then they distribute the funds accordingly to the different services that it's attached to. We might see a little bit of that happening before we actually see more consolidation within the market.
Yeah, I think you could see some packages start to spring up, but I think at that point you're starting to get more and more towards that cable model, and people are just like, I don't want that. Like, even if it's not costing me any extra money, I don't want this service kind of occupying my space, right? Um,
Yeah.
I want to stay focused. So I think Peacock and CBS All Access, they're interesting, but like I don't know that people are necessarily going to continue to pay in order to have access to the Honeymooners or Taxi or some of these shows that are in their back catalog. It is kind of like, all right, once you watch Star Trek Picard, there's not a lot that's still keeping you there. There's so much other content out there competing for your time that it just doesn't feel like it's going to be a long term purchase.
Yeah. So let's do something fun here for a minute. So let's just say that you had to make an investment into three of these companies. Okay, we're looking ahead. You know, you and I are always looking ahead, especially being researchers in the kind of innovation space. You have to invest into three of these companies, number one, number two, and number three, that are going to perform well over the next 5 to 10 years. Where are you going to put your money?
Well, I think the first two are kind of no-brainers. I mean, the first one is I would put Disney up front, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I think that they have some content that Netflix hasn't gotten to yet, and that's the big kind of franchise blockbuster action movie. I think that they have, between the Marvel movies and the Star Wars movies and some of the Disney things like Pirates of the Caribbean, they're putting out some great content. You look at the box office mojo, and every year they're probably, 7 or 8 of the top 10 movies that are released each year.
Hmm.
I don't think Netflix is there yet. They also have a lot more growth that's available to them. I think Netflix is pretty saturated. Anybody who, for the most part, anybody who wants Netflix around the world kind of has it already. So I think they're a little bit more topped out. And then I think also that they have done pretty well with technology. They're not quite at a Silicon Valley or a Netflix level yet with when it comes to technology, but they've been in an interactive space for quite some time, and I think they do pretty well with it. I think after that, I'd go with Netflix, and I think that they will eventually catch up with Disney when it comes to content. It'll take some time, and they need to cross that final barrier. They've tried with movies like Bright. I don't think they're quite there yet. When they do get there, what we'll see is a transition back to kind of competition on a feature level. And I think that they can be a leader in that area where they can say, we're going to be the ones who bring new features to the market. We're going to be the pioneers in that area. So from there forward, I think Netflix has a great advantage. The third one, I think, is a little bit more up for grabs. I would probably go with Amazon, and I think that's because they're not strictly reliant on their content offerings in order to drive revenue. There's a lot to offer from having a Prime membership, and
Hmm.
and they also have a little bit more of a varied delivery model. It's not just subscription. There's also kind of direct paying for content. It's a model in there. I think it's that fragmentation of the experience has some experience issues, but at the same time, you can get content on Amazon if you're willing to pay for it that you can't get on the other services. So that I think is a nice supplemental option. Um,
Yeah.
and then some of the other ones, I don't know, they might surprise us.
That's true. Yeah. I agree with you. I think Disney is number one for sure, especially on my list. Full disclosure, I'm actually an investor in Disney. There's a reason for that, and that's because I do see what they're doing with content, and I'm really excited about it. Netflix for sure. I think they're definitely going to be a contender. I actually think that Netflix could potentially in the next 5 to 10 years be acquired by someone like Disney. I think it would be a huge, huge acquisition, but I think they could roll everything together, if not being acquired by someone like Amazon, who has, obviously very deep pockets. For the third one, I actually kind of feel like I go back and forth between Amazon and Apple. And the reason is because Apple doesn't move as fast and aggressively as Amazon does. And Amazon has a huge catalog, but they do make smart, long term strategic decisions. And who knows? I mean, they may go out and buy two or three major studios. They may purchase Netflix. That could happen too. I mean, gosh, even in Bob Iger's book, he talked about how he and Steve Jobs had talked about potentially combining the companies, Apple and Disney, one day, right? So it's hard to say what's going to happen, but I do know that they're not going to just disappear. I think they're going to come out with some pretty strategic decision that is either going to be extremely successful or moderately successful. So I think if I had to take a pick, I'm gonna go with Apple on this one. I just think that something big is going to happen in the near future. Do you agree, or am I kind of off base here? You think?
Well, I think Apple is definitely one to watch. There's a
Yeah,
couple things holding me back on Apple, and one of them is that they're starting from scratch on their content. So I don't think that content production, especially because you need a certain level of quality, I don't think it's really something that you can just throw money at and it's going to work out. I think it takes some time. I think it has to grow somewhat organically. Yeah, there's a learning curve that's in there. But I think if they stick with it, they're going to have a chance for the long term. They just have to be willing to lose money in the short term. The one thing that I think that from a technical experience standpoint, they need to get over is they need native apps on Android and Windows devices.
agreed.
They can't just rely on browser playing. It feels so archaic. They need to get over that. They need to put that out there. They're never going to be able to compete otherwise, especially if they move into international markets. It's just going to be too much of a handicap for them.
Very true. And with that said, I think we have a wrap for our first episode. That was really fun, and I'm glad we got to deep dive into all of these different areas of streaming. Dee, do you want to tell everyone what we're going to talk about next week?
Next week, we're going to start looking at movie theaters. Are they doomed? Are they going away like everybody seems to think? Or are they going to evolve for the future?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to our first podcast. We're really excited, and we hope everyone will listen in next week. Have a great rest of your day.